Today we are here with the lovely Nat Commons. Nat, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Nova.
Nat is one of our head teacher trainers. So Nat and Dustin are who run the 200-hour yoga teacher training, and she also teaches at both the Brighton and Mordialloc studios. So before we dive into the topic today, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, the background of even before yoga, and how you got to be a yoga teacher.
I've always been heavily into movement, in dance, gymnastics, and fascinated with how the human body works. So my gateway, I guess, was through the body, and I went and studied myotherapy. But through myotherapy, I was like, no, I'm meant to be a teacher. Like, that was my purpose, that was my dharma in life, was to be a teacher. So I decided to study a bachelor and a master's in physical education, psychology, and student wellbeing, which started my love of the human mind as well as the human body. And so using those elements to learn myself and to understand myself, but then also to be able to share and teach other people. But I realised that I didn't want to teach in secondary schools. I wanted to teach with people who really wanted to learn and to grow and to evolve, where I could really immerse myself in the experience. And all I knew at that time was competitive sport. So I worked a lot and started a studio for cheerleading and also for dancing. And that was an amazing experience where I got to work with people from all walks of life, from as young as 2.5 through to 56, I think was the eldest athlete I had at the time. But in doing that, it was such a competitive industry, quite a toxic industry at times, that I lost myself and I abandoned myself a little bit, which is where I found yoga. And all of a sudden it was a activity I got to do where there was no competition. It was about me feeling good. And so I would leave yoga feeling like a better person, and so becoming nicer. And I noticed I changed and my relationships changed. And so I wanted to know why.
Such a profound shift when you start yoga, and that experience comes inwards, it's a real profound feeling.
Yeah, it's so profound, and it's just, there's this pull to understand the why, but also to understand myself without any need to achieve. And so that's when I started my yoga teacher training at Warrior One. I did the very first training in 2018, and I had the amazing teachers of Dustin, which I now co-facilitate with. He's just a full 360 full circle moment. And then also the amazing Monica, who still teaches at Warrior One down at Brighton as well. So I fully immersed myself into full studentship, fully immersed in all the yoga practices, both the physical meditation, pranayama, and just yoga as a lifestyle, which was an incredible experience and is an incredible experience because now I get to share it with so many other people and see the impact and the shifts that happen in their lives. And seeing that has now driven me to also study psychotherapy, which is now bringing a Western perspective and an Eastern perspective of yoga and merging them together so that I have this really beautiful mind, body, spirit connection starting to be created in myself, but also that I get to share with other people.
Yes, I love how you're weaving the psychotherapy into your classes, and I've heard nothing but amazing feedback on that. So that's a really beautiful connection. And I guess that's what we're talking about today, is yoga and psychotherapy and the journey from the head to the heart. So do you want to give us a little bit of context and your perspective around that?
Yeah, so I think it's really first important to acknowledge how difficult that journey is.
100%.
We're so disconnected and so disorganized in our minds, so to actually drop into our body and to connect to our soul and connect to our heart is such a multifaceted and complex thing to do. There's this beautiful quote from Andrew Bennett, which is, the longest journey you'll ever have to take is from the 18 inches from your head to your heart.
I love that quote.
It's such a great quote, and it just shows you it's the longest journey, which means it takes time and it takes faith and it takes patience. And when we look at yoga, yoga is a lifelong practice, and there's so many ways that we can move through the yoga journey to try and find that connection. And yoga itself means to yoke, or it means union of body, mind and spirit, because it acknowledges that we are often moving through this human experience fragmented and stuck in our head and the afflictions of the mind. And so what psychotherapy and yoga allows us to do is start to acknowledge ourselves, to come back into wholeness. So it's not just all love and light and gratitude and positive affirmations. They're beautiful things, but we also have shadow. We have darkness.
Yes.
We have aspects of ourselves that we may have suppressed, repressed, or avoided. And it's starting to acknowledge those parts of ourselves, loving those parts of ourselves, and coming back into a complete whole person rather than trying to be perfect, which is just a whitewashing of who we are. So it's like, let's come back into wholeness through these practices.
How do you think we've come to be so disconnected with our hearts?
Well, I think it's the way that we're brought up in society, and the having to do and the rushing around and the shoulds, the coulds, the to-do lists. There's also...
I love a to-do list.
Love the to-do list. Yeah, I've seen your to-do list.
They're long.
They are long. But like, we get caught up in that.
Definitely.
And so we get caught up in that. We also have our social environments that we grow up in and that we continue to move through. And so they can create internal mind maps, and they can create belief systems and value systems which we may never have questioned for ourselves. Do these actually align for me? Are they actually mine, or are they just being influenced by other people's thoughts, feelings, values, and belief systems? And then there's also just our upbringing and the relationships. So from the age of 0 to 7, our developmental years, we're influenced so easily just because we're growing and we're developing and we're being told what is right, what is wrong. And so that can influence how we behave, how we react, our thoughts, and how we show up in the world. And then within that, we can start to develop defense mechanisms. So when we move through those developmental phases, we can develop conditions of worth which can impact how we behave, and it becomes like a mask or a facade that we put on just so that we're accepted. Right. And then we can also experience through life trauma, whether that be a big traumatic experience, and sometimes there's little traumas that can happen, which then get stuck in our body and we start to interact that way.
So with these conditions of worth and trauma, can you tell us more, a little bit more about that? Because that's interesting, right? Because they say your issues are stored in your tissues.
Yes, and they are. The body becomes our storage of our data. So conditions of worth is like it sounds. It is to be proven worthy, we must meet certain conditions.
Yes.
So we start to create a criteria of what we need to meet to be accepted, to be loved, to be enough. We hear it a lot in yoga. You are enough. Everything that you need is within you. And it's true, but because of the way that many people have been brought up, because of society and because of the way the world works, we start to go, oh, I need to do this to be considered enough, or I need to do this to be worthy, or I need this to be valued, or I need to be this way to be loved. Things are conditional. It's not an unconditional experience. And so what conditions of worth are is it's our own perceived, so it's not necessarily what was the absolute truth, it's our perceived view of how we need to show up to be accepted. So it can show up in ways of perfectionism, it can show up in ways of people pleasing, it can show up in ways of having really poor boundaries. And so we start to create defenses and mechanisms and masks and walls and armor so that we don't get rejected, because we feel that if we show up authentically, how we feel, if it doesn't meet the criteria, they'll leave me, they'll reject me, they won't like me, I won't belong. So that's our conditions of worth. And then, so they can get developed, and then we start to show, and then we lose ourselves because we become the facade and we're like, who actually am I?
Yes.
Like, who am I at my deepest level? I don't know, I'm stuck in my head.
Totally. And how do you think yoga helps us reconnect with ourselves?
So yoga, I believe, is, well, one, it is a physical practice that we can go to studio for, but it's also a lifestyle. It's a way of living. And so yoga is a practice. It's a lifelong practice, as we mentioned before, but it's an embodied practice. If we look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, so the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are an ancient philosophical text that has 196, depending on which book you read, it can be more or less, but 196 sutras, and sutras mean threads. And so it gives tools and resources and ways to start to overcome some of this disconnect, to get out of our head, to get into our body, and to start to remove some of the suffering and inflictions that are placed upon us. So the Yoga Sutra, the second one, 1.2, is Yoga Chittavritti Nirodha, meaning to still the fluctuations of the mind. It's like the ocean, the waves, like they crash and they cause bubbles and they hit things and they don't care where they go. That's our thoughts. So if we can start to drop down beneath the waves, right into the depth of the ocean, right into the still point, we take that from our head and drop into the still point of ourselves, we can start to reconnect. With that in mind, how do you do that? Like if this is all happening and there's this crazy swirl and swish and crash and boom and chaos happening,
yes,
how do you even get past that to find your still point?
Tell us how.
How? And that's where the breath comes in. And that's why yoga, your breath is so important. And it's not just breathing, inhale, exhale. It's the quality of your breath. It's the long, deep, slow, even, smooth and subtle breath quality, even in the challenges. So if you've been to my class, which I know you have, they can move quickly and they can also have challenging moments where you don't know where you're going.
Yes.
I know where you're going. You may not know where you're going. But if you can maintain your breath through that and stay in the center of the storm or at the still point at the bottom of the ocean, in amongst everything happening, you'll start to see everything clearly. There's still stillness while there's this whirl and swirl happening around you. You can stay completely centered and not get caught up in what's happening up
in
here.
the mind.
And so from there, little things will start to emerge. It's like if you were at the bottom of the ocean, you'd start to see all the sea life swirling around you and the colours and the spaciousness and the expansiveness and the ground that's holding you. Whereas if you're stuck up here, you don't see any of that. It's just the to-do list and the shoulds and coulds and haves to and where am I need to be? Oh, I need to get my nails done. Oh, where am I having for dinner? Instead of,
Monkey mind.
Monkey mind.
Constantly going.
Yeah. So if we can drop into the still point, we can start to go, how am I today? In this present moment, yoga is a practice of presence. If we're in the past or the future, we're not living. We have to be in the present to be truly alive.
Yes.
So it brings us back to presence and we can go, how am I? And then we know, how am I? We can go, what do I need? What changes or shifts do I need to make? How do I want to be? So not just who am I, how do I want to be in the world? How do I want to show up? And so I think that's really important. The breath slows us down.
Yes.
Which allows us to slow our mind down, which slows our nervous system down. So we come into a regulated state, which gives us time and space to notice what's happening in between the spaces, what's happening in the spaces between. So that's really, really powerful. And it draws us in. The breath also draws us in, which I also think if you add on beyond the breath, once you've gone into the slowness, it's important to acknowledge Kriya Yoga. So Kriya Yoga is part of Patanjali's sutras, and Kriya Yoga means to take action or to initiate towards one's goal. And it's made up of 3 parts. One is tapas, which tapas is to be dedicated and committed and to show up again and again and again and again every day in your practice, whether you're uncomfortable, whether you're having a good or bad day. You know, sometimes you don't want to show up just because you are having a good day and you want to go and do other things. It's like, still show up even if it's just for 5 minutes. Just keep showing up, step into the fire, because part of self-actualizing, part of meeting self-realization is that you continually grow. And growth is uncomfortable.
Can be.
Can be. So it's like, keep showing up, keep practicing so that you can keep connecting to yourself, work through your defenses, work through whatever comes up. And when they do come up, acknowledge them and accept them, and then do something with it. Like, use your practice to go, what does this mean for me? And do I still need it? Is it still serving me? The second part is svadhyaya, which is self-study. So it's study of the ancient texts, whether that be the sutras or something else, but it's also study of self. And so it's going in and starting to look at yourself and go, who am I? Is this illusion, Maya? Is it delusion? Or is it actual truth? Is it true to me? Is it still true to me? And again, it's peeling through some of the layers and going beneath all the fluctuations and coming back into your still point, which I think is really powerful. And then the third one is Ishvara Pradhyana, which is a surrender to something greater than myself. So it's believing in a guiding or protecting force that helps you on your way so that you know that you're exactly where you should be when you're there. So in any given moment, you are where you're supposed to be in terms of your growth, your development, no matter how challenging that moment may be, which I think is really beautiful and powerful. So those three things together, tapas, svadhyaya and Ishvara Pradhyana, make up this Kriya Yoga, which invites us to learn who we are by showing up, by studying ourselves in the ancient texts and believing in something greater than ourselves, whether that be source, God, universe, higher self, whatever it is for you, but it's having faith and patience and allowing yoga to do its job, to do yoga. You don't need to force it.
You've articulated that so beautifully, and while you were speaking, I was thinking about the fluctuations of the mind and how a lot of people that I've met in the studio say to me, I don't go to yin because my mind won't stop. And I guess, that's what you're alluding to, that the purpose of it is not for the mind to stop. It will still be there, but we're trying to, if I'm correct, go deeper than the waves on the surface, right? We're trying to go into the depths of the ocean to feel, to be present, to see, and not to live on the surface where a lot of us are living in the mind.
100%. We can't completely still the mind. We're humans and we're living a human experience. So unless you want to go and be a monk and sit in a cave and renounce everything in your life, there is just no way you can still your mind because you wouldn't be able to function as a human. So it's starting to notice that we have a gazillion thoughts a day, but they're not all true. They're just thoughts. So we can let them float by, but going deeper. Yeah, exactly what you just said.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it makes me think of, in Mordialloc, we have a mural on the wall outside the studio, and it's a mind map of what yoga means to our community. And it's things like that. It's my escape. It's my solitude. It's my depth of the ocean. There's all these powerful words because that's what helps us in the practice to connect to ourselves, right? 100%. That's the journey. That's the journey from the head to the heart, right?
100%. That's what it is. That you pretty much just summed up the whole
podcast in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So is there anything, tips or tricks or anything you'd like to add for people that are like, this is resonating with me, I feel connected to this?
I would just say that to connect to your head to heart, as we said at the very beginning, it's a long journey and it can't be rushed. I see a lot on social media and I hear it around all these quick fixes and all you have to do is this, this, this. What you have to do is continue to show up for yourself and know that it will take time and it takes faith and it takes dedication and it takes going in and not avoiding. And it takes community. Like having a community and a support system and relationship with people is one of the most healing things that you can possibly have. And I think that's what's beautiful about a yoga space and a yoga studio is there's like-minded people who are all on a similar journey. So they want to be in relationship and they want to connect. We're stuck here because we're not connecting to people and we're not connecting to ourselves, and that's the biggest relationship.
Totally.
And so it's getting out of our own head, getting out of our own walls and starting to have conversations that are conscious, that are sometimes uncomfortable, but sometimes beautiful and sometimes both.
Yeah, I love that. The consistency of showing up to the mat, to your practice, whatever that may look like, is really where it's at. Thank you so much. I really enjoy this conversation. We hope you have too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.